back in 1997, we formed a group of Israeli and Palestinian intellectuals who used to meet every 6 months, either in Jerusalem on the Jewish side or in Ramallah on the Palestinian side. And we worked together for some 8 years through the Second Intifada, which started in 2000. We worked together, and then this group dissolved and, as a matter of fact, evaporated, because the conditions and the context and the structures of the confrontation between the two collectivities were stronger than us. I mean, it was, although we were friends and we were very much in contact with each other, it was quite clear after a time that the circumstances are stronger than we, and we never met again. I mean, we still became personal friends, but we didn't go on in trying to build up peace. For example, the Second Intifada, which broke out in 2000, you may remember, it were very violent. And it was both on the Israeli side as well as the Palestinian side, big turmoil for the people, because Israelis were becoming very violent in the West Bank. And on the other side, the Palestinians made some actions of themselves in Tel Aviv and in other places. And that, of course, was quite a troublesome time for all of us. What I want to say is that we have to understand what the nature of the conflict is. If it were just, the question, as Wolfgang put it, of meeting and saying we are all human beings and let's be together, if that was the problem, I think we wouldn't have any trouble. But, we just had a little war here some 2 weeks ago. For 10 days, which was quite violent. I mean, what Israel managed to damage and kill in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, is unbelievable. And on the other side, I mean, I'm sitting here in Tel Aviv, and we had every other night, sirens in the middle of the night because rockets were fired at Tel Aviv. So we're talking about something that is not quite the question of meeting nice people and saying, let's live in peace. But the question is, why is peace not upcoming? And I want to start by saying that the conflict in my view, and I think that if you don't accept my view in that respect, then everything that I will be telling you further on will be, futile. The conflict is a territorial conflict. It's not the conflict of, two religions or two ethnicities, or it's not the conflict of people not liking each other's culture. Because if you see Israel everyday culture, you see that it's very much influenced by Arabic culture. For example, food and even music and so on is very much influenced by Arabic culture. It's not a religious conflict because, as a matter of fact, if I may pick up to what Wolfgang say, Jews never suffered in Islam what they suffered at the Christianity. I mean, you have to understand that, the Crusades and later on the Inquisition and culminating in the Holocaust, it happens in the West, it happens in Europe, it didn't happen in the Islamic state. Jews lived in the Islamic state. They were second-grade citizens, but still they were not attacked as they were attacked in Christianity. I'm saying that just to say that it's not a religious conflict that we are having here. It's for sure becoming more hateful now because of what happened. But if you look at the beginning of all of it, of the origins of the conflict, it's a territorial conflict. It's a conflict because two collectivities, one that lived here for hundreds of years and another that came here at the beginning of the 20th century as a matter of fact, at the end of the 19th century, because of the upcoming of the national emancipation movement, which is called Zionism. And Zionism was a movement which said, because in Europe we have the anti-Semitism, Jews are persecuted in Europe, we have to solve the so-called Jewish problem, the problem of Jews being seen by Gentiles as a problem. We have to solve it. And there were three ways of solution of solving in 19th century the Jewish problem. The one was that Jews should assimilate. And as a matter of fact, it is an irony of history that the best place for Jews to assimilate in 19th century was in Germany. Jews absorbed German culture. And if you talk about Germany in 19th century, there was Deutsche Bürger mosaischen Glaubens. It was German citizens of Jewish faith. This was the concept which they built in order to say we are part of Germany, we are part of German culture. The second position, or the second, if you want, the strategy to overcome the Jewish problem was socialism, saying we have to free all mankind, all humanity, and the Jews within humanity, not as an extra collectivity, but within humanity. This is why many, many Jews became socialists and, as a matter of fact, revolutionaries, especially in Germany. You know that a lot of the German revolutionaries were Jews. You know, people like Rosa Luxemburg, people like Erich Mühsam. I can name a lot of people who were, you know, the revolutionists in Germany. The third strategy, which was picked up by many Jews at the end of the 19th century, was Zionism. And Zionism said that the solution for the Jewish problem cannot be but a national one. Jews should have their own state. Now, the question was, where could this state be? Because, you know, Jews were spread all over the world. There's no one continent in the world where there were no Jews. They were spread all over the world. And now you said they should come to one country, but they had not have the territory for this country. They had not the collectivity to inhabit this territory because they were spread all over the world. As a matter of fact, they didn't have even a common language. I don't know whether you know that at the beginning of Zionism, the question was whether Hebrew, which was quite underdeveloped, it was still a holy language, or Yiddish, which was the language of the Eastern European Jews, if that one should be the national language. Now, even thinking about the possibility that Yiddish should have become the national language of the Jews is an absurdity, because, you know, Jews from Morocco or from Syria or from Algeria or from Iraq don't speak Yiddish, which means that in the beginning, the Oriental Jews were not in the scope of the Zionism. It was only in the 50s, after the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were not there anymore, that they started to import the Jews from the Oriental countries, which have caused one of the major ethnic inner Israeli problems here. But what I'm saying is that the main problem was, in which territory should this Jewish state be constituted? As a matter of fact, a man like Herzl was thinking about Uganda, you know, colonizing Uganda. What have Jews lost in Uganda? You don't understand. But Uganda was one of the options. But then they decided, no, it should be the Holy Land. Why? Because for many thousand years, Jews have lived in this territory, not for many, but some 1,000 years ago, Jews have lived in this territory of Palestine and then were exiled. And 2,000 years ago, they were exiled and spread all over the world. And then they said, in the beginning of the 20th century, this is the territory because we have biblical boundaries to it. You know, always when I'm joking and I'm telling about these things in Germany, maybe our non-German guests here will not understand the joke, but I have to still to tell it. Imagine that the raison d'etre of the German state, nowadays German state, would be the Hermannschlacht, you know, the victory of Hermann the Cherusker, Arminius, the leader of the Cherusker tribe, who 9 after Christ have won his battle against Varius the Roman, and this had been. Imagine that you would argue today that because 2,000 years ago Hermann the Cherusker have won against Varus, that this is the myth of the beginning of the German state nowadays. But this is about the thing what they were thinking. They were thinking, although they were a secular movement, they were thinking that, as a matter of fact, we belong to this territory because 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, we have been living here. You know, in the meantime, there were here the Crusaders, and later on the Turks, and later on the British Mandate and so on. Jews have always lived here, but it was quite a little minority who lived here. Most of the Jews lived all over the world. They did not live in Palestine. Now they had the slogan who said, the Jews as a people without land is coming into a land without people. They saw that Palestine was empty. They didn't think, they knew that it was not empty, but they postulated that it was empty. And that is why they said, well, if it's empty anyway, we can get, because it belongs to us. And then they got started to colonize. This is the beginning, dear friends, this is the beginning of the Middle East conflict, which started right from the beginning of the Zionist movement. People came from all over the world to Palestine and said, this is our land, while the people who lived in this land were not accepted as part of the population to live here. Now, before the state was founded in 1948, the colonization of it was under the mandate of the British government. And in that time, this colonization was not legal. It was an illegal immigration to Palestine. And then in the year 1948, I think very much because of the impact of the Holocaust, where the world understood that the Jewish people is in trouble because it was exterminated, or they started to exterminate it in the camps of the Nazis, they voted for the foundation of a Jewish state. And right from this moment, the conflict became a violent one because the war of 1948 ended in what the Palestinians call nowadays the Nakba. That is the expulsion of the Palestinian people who lived here to other countries, most of them living, by the way, in what is called today West Jordanland, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. And that had become, as a matter of fact, the manifestation of the fact that the Palestinians lost their lands. And they never forgot the fact that their national catastrophe resulted in what Wolfgang just was talking about, in the fact that the Jews had now to be recompensated for the fact that they had suffered a catastrophe in the measure of the Holocaust, and had to have a state of their own now, that was in the land where already the Palestinians went and they were expelled. And this is the thing that you have to understand. It's not an hate from the beginning. It's not a religious thing here. It's not an ethnic, it's not a cultural thing here. All the more so that when the Oriental Jews came in the 50s to Israel, when it happened that they came here, they brought with them, what did they bring with them? They brought with them Arabic culture. You have to understand the Oriental Jews, you know, the Syrian Jews and the Moroccan Jews and the Yemenite Jews and so on, were, as a matter of fact, Jewish Arabs. And they came to Israel. When they came to Israel, they brought themselves with them something which had to be consolidated with the fact that the Zionist state was built by European Jews. It was a European idea of the nation state which constituted Israel. And this is the beginning of the territorial conflict. I'm saying that because the amount of hatred that burst out during the last war that we had here 10 days ago, not only between Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the Israeli Air Force, but within Jews and Arabs, Jews and Palestinians in Israel. You know, we have here mixed cities like Nazareth and Akko and Jaffa and so on. There were big clashes. There were, as a matter of fact, were a lynch justice as well on the Arab side as well as on the Jewish side within Israel. Within Israel, we're talking about something that all of a sudden they realized here in Israel that the problem that had started in 1948 is not over yet. Not only in front of the Palestinians in the occupied territories in the West Jordan land and in Gaza Strip, but in Israel too. In Israel too, this problem is still a vivid problem. Why? Because the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens are living as second-rate citizens for more than 70 years. They are having a higher living standard as most of the Arabs, or certainly of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, but even a higher living standard than in Syria or in Iraq or in Jordan. But they are within Israel second-rate citizens. They will not, they are never, the parties will not be legitimate to be part of the coalition which is to build in the Israeli parliament. They are not in the giving the resources. They're underprivileged all the time. They are not, have no access to Israeli elites and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that the problem that had started as a territorial problem now, meanwhile, is of course a social problem as well, and is a political problem as well. Now, all that has become a deadlock, I would say a cul-de-sac, after the so-called victory of the so-called 6 Days War in 1967. Why? Because when Israel occupied the West Jordan land, the West Bank, it turned out that the so-called national religious Jews, and I will explain in a moment, started to talk in terms of a religion, saying this land is a sacred land because it has been promised by God. You have to understand that Zionism was a secular movement that did not talk in terms of theology and in terms of religion and so on. But starting in 67 and starting colonizing the West Jordan land as being the land of our forefathers started when the national religious Jews came to power as part of the coalition, but all the ways the coming decades became ever stronger and stronger. Now I have to explain here something. Orthodox Jews, Jews who are, you know, religious, some of them are anti-Zionist, some of them are not Zionists. Very, very few of them are Zionists. Why? Because if you take the Orthodox Jews, you know, the radical religious Jews, the state of Israel is a sin for them. It's not an achievement. It's a sin for them because according to their belief, the Jewish state should come to life only when the Messiah has arrived. Now, I know that many of you think that Messiah has arrived already. You just said Pfingsten and so on. But the Jewish Messiah did not arrive yet. So for the Orthodox Jews, for the radical Jewish believers, the state of Israel is a sin against God's will, because only when God will the Messiah arrive, and only then the state of Israel or the kingdom of Judea shall arise again. That was at the beginning a big contradiction between the Orthodox Jews and Zionism. They were enemies, as a matter of fact. There were times when in the Independence Day, you know, after the state was built, in the Independence Day, the Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, in Mea Shearim, were hanging out black sheets in order to show that they are mourning the fact that the state of Israel has come to live. The big question was, how could you reconcile Messianism, meaning the expecting the Messiah come, and Zionism? That was the big question. And then a person called Rav Kook solved the problem. How did he solve the problem? Saying, it's true, we have to await the Messiah, but obviously Messiah is already on his way. How do we know that? Because of Zionism. And how do we know that he's obviously around the corner now? Because we have already conquered the land of our forefathers. You have to understand what I'm talking about here. It's unbelievable for me, who is a rational man. I mean, I'm a Marxist and I don't believe in God and so on. But you have to understand that a major part of our politics is based on this belief, on the belief that we are in the land of our forefathers, and we have to build this land and conquer the land and to build up, colonize it and make settlements, because we have to await Messiah who is around the corner. I don't know whether you understand what I'm saying. What I'm trying to give you here, that an irrational pre-modern ideology, which has of course been the basis of Jewish belief for thousands of years, has become part and parcel of the Israeli politics nowadays. And now under Netanyahu, it's not only that this right-wing extremist has been part of colonizing the West Bank, but in the meantime, people like Smotrich or Ben Gvir, who are Carnists, are really big fascists who say there is no way that we can accept that Arabs are living in our land, and they, as a matter of fact, would like to have an ethnic cleansing. We called it a population transfer here, which was, by the way, the ideology of the Rav Kahana. I don't know whether you remember him. He was really an extremist who was so radical that the Israeli parliament did not accept his party, and he was expelled from the Israeli parliament. His followers, his heirs, are Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Now, these people today have become part and parcel of the coalition of Netanyahu. He's so desperate to stay in power that he even brought these people who really were anathema, they were taboo. You don't interact with people who are the followers of the Rav Kahana, who was, a big fascist. It starts with a territorial problem and has, of course, its manifestations in hate and in religious slogans and so on. But the problem is the problem of the territory that both collectivities own. Now, why has this become a cul-de-sac? And this is, Wolfgang, where I say that you're talking about peacemaking and so on. There were two options right from the beginning. The one option was the two-state solution. The two-state solution means Israel will accept the borders of 1967. The Palestinians should get the West Jordan land and the Gaza Strip, and that would be the solution. Right from the beginning of the 70s of last century, this was undermined by the fact that Israelis started to colonize the West Jordan land, the West Bank, to colonize it in a way that what began back in the 70s with several hundred people who started to build up the first settlements has now resulted in an amount of about 600 to 700,000 Jewish settlers in the West Jordan land. You cannot build a Palestinian state there anymore. It's not to be done. I mean, you cannot do it because it is colonized and it has been permanently supported by Israeli governments. And I want to give you just an example. All Israeli governments supported the settlements in the West Bank, in the West Jordan land. Even in the century, in the decade of the 1990s, where Yitzhak Rabin was about to make peace with Yasser Arafat, you know, it was the Oslo Accord. Even in that time, he was then killed, as you know. But even in that time, in this decade where it was the nearest to a peaceful solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even in that decade, the amount of Jewish settlers in the West Bank were doubled from 100,000 to 200,000, even under those parties who wanted to make the peace with the Palestinians, which gave me the idea that I don't really believe now that Israel ever looked at the possibility of really giving up the land. I don't even think that from a certain point in time that they even wanted peace. And what we're talking today is that while there is no other solution in the horizon, the two-state solution has collapsed. Now, the reality is that if you don't take the two-state solution, if you don't accept the two-state solution as it was declared and postulated time and again, then you have the reality of a binational state. Now, this binational state can be either democratically accepted by all the Jews and the Palestinians, and then you have not more a Zionist state, but a state of all its citizens, which would be 50% and 50% Jews and Palestinians. Because if you take all the Palestinians living in Israel, living in the Gaza Strip, and living in the West Bank, and taking all the Jews who are living here in this land, you have 50-50, about 50-50. Now, if it would be accepted, that would be a solution which could be the binational state, the so-called binational state. But if you don't accept the binational state, you inevitably are aiming towards an apartheid state. Because that would mean that Jews who are not the majority are ruling militarily, economically, politically over a vast amount of Palestinians who are second-rate citizens in this country. This cul-de-sac has been perpetuated by Benjamin Netanyahu for the last 10, 12 years. What he managed to do, and it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable how he was successful in, blowing up the Palestinian problem from the agenda of the Israeli politics. Having Trump on his side for the last 4 years was only a circumstance which supported him in not having to tackle the Palestinian problems. And as a matter of fact, nobody in Israel talks anymore about occupation and talk anymore about the Palestinian problem. This he managed to do. Until this last war now, where it turned out that not only is the Palestinian problem still kicking around, but the Palestinian problem within Israel is still alive. This is what I started to say for him, that it resulted in turmoils when this war began, because many of the Israeli Palestinians felt a solidarity, with their brothers in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. I will complicate this by one fact, and then end, because I want us to have a discussion here. Within the Palestinian population, and for that, Wolfgang, I would like you the next time to bring a Palestinian here to talk with us, so that not me, the Israeli Jew, are talking in the name of the Palestinians. I was talking about Israel and the Zionism now. We should bring a Palestinian here, but if I may observe, that there is a big conflict within the Palestinian population. The people in the Gaza Strip are under the Hamas. Hamas is an Islamistic movement which has not much in common with the PLO, which has been is still a secular movement, and not based on religious belief. I mean, all the Arabs are probably more or less religious, but the people from the Hamas are Islamistic, while the PLO is relatively secular. There had been a civil war between the both, and they have not reconciled. It's still a big problem between the Hamas and the PLO. I think you should probably bring sometimes, Wolfgang, somebody who could talk about it from the Palestinian point of view. Not somebody who will, just make it nice and easy because the Palestinians are all good people and so on, but tell you about the conflict that they have. Not we in Israel have between Jews, leftists and rightists big problems, but they themselves have big problems. And I think that while the PLO had shown some agreement to go towards peace negotiations, at least in the 90s and even in the beginning of the so-called Nuller years, Hamas is today not prepared in any way to have an agreement with Israel. And this is why Israel is very much in favor of Hamas. Israel has helped to constitute Hamas, because Hamas will not have peace with Israel. And as a matter of fact, every time that we have a war with Hamas, which is every 5 years or 6 years, Israel is fighting Hamas, demolishing most of the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip, but will never bring to the fall down of the Hamas. They need Hamas. Netanyahu needs Hamas as Hamas needs Netanyahu, because Hamas does not want to have peace with Israel, and they can rely only on Netanyahu to not have peace with the Palestinians. So this complicates the whole problem, that all of a sudden it's not only an Israeli-Palestinian problem, but a problem of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the worst prime minister we ever had, is, as a matter of fact, supporting Hamas, because Hamas is guaranteeing his politics to stay relevant. Wolfgang, I think I've spoken enough. I could go on for hours now, and you don't want me to go for hours. So I suggest that we stop now my talk and start with the questions. By the way, do you see it? And something that said this meeting is being recorded, continue and so on. Do you see it, No, what should I do? Should I say continue or something?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay, good. Okay, Pablo, I finished. Now you take over.
Thank you so much, Mr. Professor Moshe Zuckermann.
No, not Professor. I'm Moshe. If you are Pablo, I'm Moshe. Okay, then without Professor.
Here we are. Thanks, Moshe. I invite all of you, if you have any questions right now or want to say something, that you could please raise your hand on, there's a button on the button called reactions, and there you can raise the hand so that I can put you into the list. And there is already Raphael Lenné. Please speak.
You're muted. You're muted. Raphael, you're muted. Yeah.
Hello, Moses.
Hello.
Moshe. Hello. Thank you for your interesting talk. There's one thing I would like to ask you straight away. What can we common citizens do for the peace process in your country?
Introduce short yourself, please, Raphael.
Pardon?
Introduce short yourself. Everyone who speaks, please introduce short yourself. Okay,
sorry about that. Sorry, Wolfgang. Actually, I'm part Belgian, part German. I'm an English and German teacher here in Italy. And I'm also an activist. And you know certainly a lot about European history, and it comes as crazy to hear every time the same news from Israel and Palestine. And I find that we should all engage more and support the peace process. You mentioned your idea that the two-state solution is not anymore makeable. I always had the opposite idea, that it's the only solution. But apart from this, what can we do? Last week I supported Oxfam and I simply sent some money over. And then I support Breaking the Silence, Rabbis for Peace. There are loads of lovely, great people in your country who are really engaged in supporting peace. What can we do from Europe? What can we do to help you?
Yeah, first of all, I want you to understand me. I did not say that I'm not in favor of the two-state solution. I'm very much in favor of the two-state solution, but I think that what they managed to do in Israel, to undermine it in a way that I think it is irreversible now. You know, just to explain what I'm saying, in order to have a two-state solution, you have to transport some 500,000 to 600,000 Jewish settlers from the West Bank to Israel. Now I remember when they tried to, when there were a little hill and some settlers came and put their caravan and then said, this is a new settlement. And then the army was sent in order to bring them down. What fights there were and how problematic it was. Now imagine the logistic of trying to bring back some 500,000 of people from it's irreversible. You know, there was Meron Ben-Benisti who has researched it back in the 90s. He said already, what Israel is doing all the time is to subvert, to undermine the two-state solution. I am in favor, and I think that until the Palestinians don't have, as long as the Palestinians don't have the sovereignty and the self-determination in order to have their own state, nothing will be solved. But what Israel is doing now is undermining exactly that and keeping the status quo. What I was saying is realistically just looking at what the possibilities are, not what I would like to have. By the way, what I would like to have, a world without states and a world without classes and a world without, people just living the way that Wolfgang just suggested at the beginning. Now, what can be done? I would divide my answer to two things. And the one thing is what you just said, when you meet people, I'm supporting them, Breaking the Silence and Tayush, and there are a lot of lovely people. little groups, they are not very big, little groups who are very making, if I may say, the sacred work. I mean, they are really very brave in what they're doing. But they are, of course, a very small minority who are very much hated in this country. They have no influence on this country. They have more influence within you people in Europe. They don't have any influence here. The major part of the Jews in Israel hate breaking the silence and hate Tayush and hate people like me because they are in favor of what the major part of the people here don't want. So what you can do is on the personal level, of course, support these people, Peace Now and so on, and all the people who are in favor. But this, I say, is only a side thing that you can do personally. I think what we need here is a major impact from Europe, not on a personal level, but you know, the EU should put some pressure on Israel. Mm-hmm. The EU should come to some postulates and so on, but I'm afraid, talking to Germans here, that as long as Germany is part of the EU, there never will be a pressure on Israel from the EU, because Germany will never let them to have pressure on the EU because of the German past and because, you know, of the Schuldgefühle which they have towards the Jews. Which I think is instrumentalizing the Holocaust for things that have nothing whatsoever to do anymore with the Holocaust. It even don't have anything to do with fighting anti-Semitism, but just having to do something with what I called in German Deutsche Befindlichkeit, you know, the feelings of the Germans, and not very much with politics, who are rationally trying to support the, I don't know what I see here. Do you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
We do.
Very well.
I don't know what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing here something, webinar and so on, Nachrichten and where do I?
Moshe.
Yeah.
You see can you pass you a piece of good news?
Oh, you see the screen of Mr. Jung. Could you please leave?
Mr. Jung, Jürgen. Did you put this, Jürgen? Did you put this?
Screenshot.
Okay, thank you.
Pannen leicht gemacht. Jawohl.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Where is Raphael? Raphael, yeah. What did you say at the last sentence? Because I was occupied here. If I can, what did you say about good news?
Yes, Raphael.
No, what did you say about good news?
I have some. Yes, well, actually, I was also a little bit pessimistic concerning the reactions over here in Italy. You know that we have a very strong Jewish community. In Rome, there's probably the oldest Jewish community in Europe ever. It's more than 2,000 years old. I mean,
I know, yeah.
And it's a beautiful quarter. It's my favorite quarter in Rome. Nevertheless, Italian Jews are very conservative, and they are generally 100% for Netanyahu, against Palestine, and so on. And now, finally, you have more and more groups of young Jews here in Italy who just refuse to support Netanyahu. And they have founded a movement called Not in My Name. Yeah. As the name says, they say, we refuse both violences. We refuse Bibi's policy in the West Bank, as well as we refuse Hamas. And we fully believe in the peace process. We support the two-state solution and so on. Extraordinary people, just 20 years old, but they have made their minds up, and they're really peace fighters. And now everybody in Italy sees things in a different way, because everybody shows a black and white story. Palestinians against Israelis, and now things are different. So, and many
I'm happy to hear it, Raphael. I'm happy to hear it. I don't know whether this has an impact on the global political, because as I said, as far as states are going, we need, you know, the EU to make some effort to make an impact on Israeli politics. Because if Netanyahu hears that some Italian Jews are against him, it's, you know, for him it's a piece of cake. I mean, it's nothing for him. It's only good for you and for me to know that these are the people, and for me all the more because I'm much older than you. And in my old age, I'm now here all of a sudden that some Italian Jews are in favor of peace. This is indeed very good news. But talking politically about the things, we need much stronger impact and much opposition to the Israeli politics, and I don't see it coming from the EU as far as it goes by now.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you, Moshe. We'll keep in touch anyway. I would be left. Thank you.
Please, Prof had put up his hand next, so please put your question.
Thank you very much. At first, I want to thank you very much for the speech. It was quite informing. A lot of people heard a lot of news. One thing I want to say about...
Introduce yourself short, please.
Bitte?
A short introduction of yourself, please.
Sorry, yeah. I'm a social worker. I'm working for migrants for more than 25 years in Gießen, in the central camp for refugees. And currently I'm working for the living together with Africans and coming together in the North-South conflict. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, yes.
And what I want to say about the history is, I think that Jewish people live also around about 2,000 years. Here in Germany, the first documentation was a little bit later. And so the Jews were a very important part of German people. And this is something that does not come to the consciousness of the Germans. And yeah, it's one thing, and the people in the East, they called themselves Ashkenazim, that means the Germans. This is also not known. Yeah, and you talked about Yiddish.
It's known to us, of course, that Ashkenazim are Germans.
No, it's not to us, but they give them the name because they has been pushed out of Germany in the 16th century. And Yiddish, Marmaloschen, this is a German literature language. And
Mittelhochdeutsch, yeah.
Yeah, and the most of the people, yeah, they had strange or no ideas about this very interesting literature, like from Sholem Aleichem, and people like that. My question is to you, could it be possible in future to make one state from Israel and Palestine, and to make a balance between that, what happened between these two people, to bring peace in this area?
Well, I was talking about it a little bit, and I said that I think that the prerequisite in order to make one state is that both parts still begin with their sovereignty, that the Palestinians should have their state, and Israel has a state, and then they make some kind of confederation or federation, and later on coming into one state. This would be, as a matter of fact, my ideal, if we could make it. But the prerequisite, the precondition of that is that Palestinians get their freedom, first of all. I mean, these people are living under occupation for more than 50 years. They are not free people. They are people who are occupied for over 50 years. The precondition in order to make one state is to let them, first of all, become their own sovereigns. I mean, to become free. And I think that if we start with that, with the two-state solution, we could go further on to the binational state or to one state, which would, of course, pre-require to become secular, to become, the state of all its citizens. The problem that I started to give you a sketch of is that Israel undermined this two-state solution, which I see as a precondition for it. And this is why we are now jumping immediately into, what is it all the time here? What is that now?
Again, somebody shared the screen. Can you please leave that? Hildebrecht Braun. If you touch on the bottom, there's build share screen. Yeah, exactly. In that, if you touch that again, then it will stop.
Yeah, just continue.
The green, Moshe, please just continue. Yeah,
yeah, but I'm looking at, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Anyway, what I said is that Israel undermined the possibility to let a one-state solution to come into life by saying, no, we don't want a one-state solution. We want a solution of one state in dominating and ruling all the territory and having all the Arabs being, second-hand citizens. So the problem is not whether you, Rolf, and me, we would agree that that would be the best solution, to have one state where it's the state of all its citizens. This is how it's defined usually. The state of the people who live in the state. This would be something that I would fight for, but it's not historically not possible at the moment to even try to start to politically, proceed. I know that people always say, but I want it now, I want it to become and so on. But if you're not realistic about the historical possibilities, you can become very soon an utopist or an idealist and so on, but not very much an effective political person. I would like to have socialism in the world, but I know that it's not possible at present. So in that respect, I have to see with whom I'm fighting. And I think the problem is, if you ask me what the problem is politically for us, to fight apartheid, to fight against apartheid, which has been now the dominating state of the relations between Jews and Palestinians for the last 50 years.
I know the law. I know the law. I know this law.
Which law?
The apartheid, that the Arab became a second kind.
This is a quite recent law, which is the national law that had become, but the apartheid became before the law. The apartheid came into life before the law. It was a social question. It was a question of the political, it's not only a question of the law. It's a question of in how far do Israeli Jews accept Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians as equal citizens in there, not because of the law, but because of they see in them enemy. And now, after what happened during the last war in Israel, I tried to show it to you. It's becoming even more relevant and even more acute than it was before, because we always had the illusion that at least in many parts of the of the country, the relation between the Arabs and the Jews are quite good and friendly and so on. But it was friendly as far as it goes to eat hummus together, you know, to eat a good Arab dish together. It was not very developed as far as, you know, how do you give them the resources, for example, territory in order to build the villages, in order to give them the possibility to get an access to Israelis' elite. The question of, until this very day, all the Arab parties, the Israeli Arab parties, are not parties that could get into a coalition within Israeli coalition, with a Jewish coalition, because it's a taboo. Because they call all of them terrorists, they call all of them enemies of theirs. They are, you know, the knife in the back of the country. And this is the way they talk in everyday life here. What you don't know, that this is how they talk in everyday life. The hate that came to the surface now, 10 days, 15 days ago, is not quite a surprise. It was latent all the time there. And this is why it's not the question of the law, it's the question of how Jews and Arabs are living in this country as equal citizens. And I think this was never envisaged by the Zionist state. It never accepted them as a full equal citizens. They were, of course, a minority in this land because they stayed here, but they never accepted them.
Thank you very much for your answer, Moshe.
Thanks, Rolf. Rolf, do you please want to switch off your microphone?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, there is another hand lift, but before that, I have written down quite a few questions. So I'm putting this in between. Moshe, you spoke about the Hamas needing a Netanyahu government, and while Israel needs the Hamas to legitimate.
Netanyahu needs Hamas. Netanyahu needs Hamas.
Well, then at least this way round. Last year, they for the first time agreed on deals of about access to water and money and things like this, which was quite yeah, so a new thing, and also been criticized a lot by the PLO. And now there should be elections since a long time in the Palestinian territories, and here you hear rumors that the Palestinian Authority also is not doing these elections out of the fear that Hamas would win in many places. How do you see this? Do you see this as a main reason, or what could be other reasons for the Palestinians to not go to elections? And how come that that the Hamas is winning so much ground in Palestinian territories?
If I may connect several things that you said, yes. First of all, I think that the PLO was afraid that Hamas will win these elections. They gained very much influence in the last few years, and because they showed themselves, Hamas, as fighting against Israel. I mean, the losses that they suffered there, they showed it as a virtue. And if you remember that after all the provocation that the Israeli government in Netanyahu made, which brought up to, you know, to the outbreak of the violence, the first one to protect Jerusalem, they called it, were Hamas, by firing rockets at Jerusalem, saying, we are here the protectors of Jerusalem. Now, the PLO, the moment then they hear that Hamas is the protector of Jerusalem, it's quite clear that they gained a lot of influence, and they really were afraid that they're going to lose the elections. This is why it did not come to Hamas wanted the election, PLO didn't want the election, so they were cancelled. The problem is, and I really think, Wolfgang, in order to answer this kind of question, you need a Palestinian here. It's not me who should talk about it. I'm an Israeli Jew, but you should have a Palestinian talking about it. But as far as I understand it, it's exactly what you said, Pablo. It was indeed the case that the animosity, the contradiction between PLO and Hamas manifested itself in the question of the elections. Hamas wanted the elections, PLO was afraid to lose the elections, and this is why they were cancelled.
Okay, well, you're fully right. Maybe this should have been a good question. We invited some, but unfortunately they did not even come to listen. I didn't see any of their names. I have one more question, which is connecting just to what you said.
I don't hear you. I don't hear you. There's a problem with your microphone.
Paul has raised his hand. Pablo, you have seen.
Yeah, I saw this. I just because it was spoken about it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I hear you. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So there was this appeal of people against their eviction in East Jerusalem, and the court.
We don't hear you, Pablo. There's a problem with your microphone or with your machine. We don't hear you so good.
Paul, can you please put your question?
Yes, I'll try to. Thank you very much. It's very easy after.
No, I don't see who is talking to me. Raise your hand. Who is talking to me? Oh yes, now I see you. Yeah.
Introduce please yourself, Paul.
Yes, I was going to.
Good, thanks.
Paul, and you can read out my family name. And I'm living in Paderborn or near Paderborn. And
have you been in my lecture in Paderborn some year ago or something?
Yes. That's
you have been there, yeah.
Years ago, Moshe.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, you and Rolf Becker. Yes. And I'm still working in adult education, but on a voluntarily basis. My question is not going into details, but taking up your picture, you said it's a cul-de-sac. Yes. And when you are in a cul-de-sac, you have to either return or go on straight forward and end against the wall. Do you see a possible situation that this might happen in Israel? That the contradictions are so heavily that it collapses? And if so, who is going to take over then? Or what can we do towards it to either prevent it or leave it and bring it to a better end? Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, I don't think that you should solve it. We should solve it. I mean, our cul-de-sac. The problem is indeed that at present, I don't know whether you know that we had elections and there were no decision. As a matter of fact, Netanyahu lost 4 elections, and all the time he kept being, an intermediate prime minister. The problem is that if it comes now to the anti-Netanyahu bloc, and they will take over, which is to be decided, as a matter of fact, tonight. Probably while we're talking here, Yair Lapid has made a statement in order to say that Bennett is now becoming the prime minister of Israel. But you have to understand the anti-Netanyahu bloc is some 50% of it are right-wing politicians. Bennett is more radical than Netanyahu. Gideon Sa'ar is more radical than Netanyahu. Avigdor Lieberman is not a man of peace. I mean, Avigdor Lieberman is a man who wants to be the Arabs transferred from Israel. So we are talking about not so much the solution of the problem, but the solution of the problem of getting rid of Netanyahu. It's not the political problem that we're talking about. It's not going to be solved by the new government. Am I clear in what I'm saying? Give me some sign. Am I clear in what I just said? If I'm not clear, I want to explain it. Netanyahu has been. I mean, this man has been accused of fraud and corruption and whatnot. And the man is, as a matter of fact, really a nuisance for the Israeli politics, because he wants to keep power all the time, and he's doing every dirty trick that you can think about in order to stay in power. This is one thing. This is why there was a big movement in the last year. I don't know whether you remember it, in front of his house in Jerusalem every Saturday night, a big movement of we want you to go. Now the question was, if he goes, who will take over? And the problem is that because some 80 to 85% of Israeli population is right-wing today, some of them are being even more than right-wing, are even fascist, because a major part of Israeli population, of the Jewish Israeli population, are right-wing. You don't really think in terms of Zionist left party like the Labour Party or the Meretz Party taking over. But it would be only either Yair Lapid, who is, center-right politician, or Gideon Saar, who is a right-wing politician. He was in the Likud, or Naftali Bennett, who is one of the national religious people I was talking about people who furthered, the settlement in the West Jordanland and so on. So if Netanyahu is thrown out of his position, who will take over is somebody who is not Netanyahu, but is not somebody who wants to solve the cul-de-sac that we're talking about. This is the problem. The problem that the sakas that we talk about is a structural one. It's not a personal one. It's not just a question whether Netanyahu or not, but whether ideologically people like Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman and Saar and Bennett and the religious parties who are the parties to go with Netanyahu, whether they want or don't want to get out of the cul-de-sac. They don't want. I think that the cul-de-sac is exactly what we need to keep, this stagnation of the situation, because we don't have anything to gain from having peace. Just having peace and giving back the land. The land is holy. How can you give back the land that have been promised to you by God? This is the terms that we're talking about here. So in that respect, I think, if I may say something quite heretic, the problem is that if we don't have pressure from outside, either from the United States or from the United Nations or from Europe, nothing will start to move here. Now, the United Nations are not working anymore because Trump really made what he made, and it really paralyzed them. The EU is not moving forward. They could do a lot more, but they won't do as long as Germany is a dominant country in the EU. And the only hope was, of course, with the United States. Now look at people like Obama, who was in favor of the peace movement and didn't do anything. A man like Trump, who was against the peace movement because he was only on the Israeli side and against the Palestinians. Well, he went back. Now we have Biden, but Biden is not doing anything in order to further the peace movement or the negotiations. So when I sound pessimistic, it's because I'm very realistic about the people we are talking about. We're talking about within Israel and talking about the people from outside Israel who should pressure Israel to do further moves. Israel has just, fired tons and tons of bombs on the Gaza Strip. The first thing that Biden said, we will give you again all the weapons that you need in order to keep the balance. He's an honorable man. I mean, compared to Trump, he's of course a very good politician. But if that is his politics, what are we talking about here? I mean, it's really, it's nothing to write home about. I'm very sorry that I don't think that Wolfgang invited me to come to talk here about things the way I'm talking about, but I'm really giving you my picture of things as somebody who is living here for many, many decades. And I'm not get into illusions about the situation. We are fighting the right-wing politics of Israel for many years and not very successfully. They've won time and again, every time they won, because most of the people who vote in Israel are either right or radical right wing voters. And this is the problem. The fact that they're anti-Netanyahu does not mean that they are in favor of peace. Am I clear in what I just said? The fact that they are anti-Netanyahu does not mean that they are in favor of peace. And this is one of the major problems that we are dealing with here. Yes, Pablo.
There is one question coming through the chat by Burkhard Altmann, referring to your statement that the 500,000 to 600,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank would be the obstacle to peace. He listened in an interview representative of the Palestinian community in Germany, who said that even the Jewish settlers could be staying, so they wouldn't need to be resettled in the West Bank if they were ready to accept a Palestinian state. Now there is the question whether there would be a bigger number or at least any number of people that go to settle there ready to accept to be under the jurisdiction of a Palestinian state.
Pablo, you see that I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing about the suggestion. I mean, just if I had to give an advice to the Palestinians, nobody asked me for my advice. But if I should give an advice to Palestinians, don't let them stay. That would be a cancer in your country if you let them stay, because they would never accept, the sovereignty of the Palestinian and would always fight for what they think that is a holy land that has been promised by God. So no, I don't think that this is a good idea. The Palestinians say they may stay. If they say they may stay some 10,000, 20,000, okay, it would be a minority. But letting 750,000 of people stay there, believe me, it's not a very good idea. It's a bad idea.
Before I call Salah for the following question, I would try again to ask the question that I was trying to ask when the connection was really bad. So you were speaking about the evictions in East Jerusalem, and last week the court delayed that decision on the appeal of their eviction, these people that went to court for not being evicted, and probably as in part of the ceasefire and to not overshadow negotiations. How probable do you think that there might be a deal that would stop these evictions, which have been described as acts of ethnic cleansing and the committing of war crimes by the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations? How probable do you think such an agreement, which was the cause for the violence, for the erupting violence now, or is this just a ceasefire now, which will not lead nowhere?
Yes, I would like to make the distinction between what you promise when you have a ceasefire and what is your major politics. The major politics is to get Sheikh Jarrah to Judaize, as they call it, the Judaize Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah being one of the quarters in a neighborhood in Jerusalem, which was, the main problem. The big politics, and this is what I tried to say in my speech before, the big politics of Israel was to make settlements and to occupy more and more territories and to infiltrate more and more Jews in order to make the Palestinian lives there not possible. So it may be that at the moment, because we have the ceasefire, that they stop, the activities at Sheikh Jarrah, but this will come again. As long as the policy is not changing, as long as they don't think in other categories about how should Palestinians and Jews live together, it will come again. And it is not just a question of some right-wing, small groups. It's the policy of the governments for many, many decades now. And this is the problem that we have to find. And this is why friends of mine are standing every Friday for the last 13 years in Sheikh Jarrah, before it now exploded and became, an issue which is known in the whole of the world. People were standing there, good people, people who were talking about, I think that he's not here anymore.
Raphael is there.
Raphael is here.
Is there.
Raphael, where's Raphael?
Only that you don't see the picture, but now he's coming.
Yeah, Raphael. Raphael was talking about people, like breaking the silence and so on. These people who in Sheikh Jarrah were standing for 13 years saying you are protesting, the fact that they try to Judaize this quarter. I think that the problem is not the question, the momentary problem because of the ceasefire, but the major problem is that the policy did not change. They want to Judaize Galilee, they want to Judaize parts of Jaffa, they want to Judaize parts of Eastern Jerusalem, and this is a major problem. This is the major problem that we have to fight. We can support these people who are demonstrating all the time. We don't demonstrate by ourselves. I've signed millions of petitions in that. But the problem is not mine or you or Raphael's or whoever personal standing and view. The question is whether the policy of the Israeli government never changed in that respect for many, many years. And what exploded now is that you think that you can go on that way. We tell you you can go on this way. This is what exploded at the moment. But we have to wait and see how long the ceasefire will be kept.
So not much hope on the long term. Salah, your question, please.
Yeah, my question. So we know that we cannot talk about the conflict Israel-Palestine without involving the Arabic world and Islamic world. So my question to Moshe is really the democratization of the Arabic world, Islamic world, really is in the benefits of achieving the peace between Israel and Palestine, or is Israel has a fear of democratization of any Arabic country? I mean, if we give example of the Egypt, when they had like 12 years ago a revolution and they elected a president with the votes and everything, but we know that everybody was against this and they did the coup and they stopped. Now Egypt is the most dictatorship hard in the world. So I hope you get my question.
Yeah, I understand your question very well. I think that Israel is always thinking in terms of how can they keep the relations with the Arab countries, not in peace terms, but in non-war terms, and the fact that Israel could have a silent border with Egypt for many, many years since Sadat, and a silent border with Jordan for many, many years, does not mean that Israel is in favor of the democratization of Egypt or of Jordan or any other country, but just the interest of Israel. Israel itself, if I may say so, I mean, I'm really talking here things that some of you will not be very willing to hear, but I don't think that Israel itself is is much of a democracy these days. You can't occupy another people for 50 years and say that you are a democracy. And after that, Netanyahu has brought, to downfall, the division between, the powers of the judicative and executive and so on in Israel. It really damaged in a way. Even that formal aspect of democracy is not working anymore. People are here very much racist against foreign people, and it's not a very democratic state, although we have formally always said we are the only democracy in the Middle East. But you can't be a democracy if you are occupying another country or another people. And in that respect, I think that the question of democratization of the Arab states is not a question that is bothering Israel in terms of democracy, but in terms of how do I keep, the geopolitical situation calm as it is, and not having any regional wars against Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and Egypt anymore. This is exactly what Israel wants. And in that respect, the democratization, which would bring up, for example, an Islamistic government in Egypt, as it was by then, is of course not in favor of what Israel. And then it came Mubarak with his dictatorial government, and he had the best of relationship with Israeli governments. So the question is, what are we talking about when we're talking about democracy? We're talking not about democracy, we're talking about geopolitical interests of the countries in this region. There's not much of democracy going on in this whole region in which I'm living. I mean, I hope that you understand that. I mean, there are no democratic traditions, neither in the Arab states, and for many decades, not anymore in Israel too. And as a matter of fact, if you try to think, where did the Jews come from? They did not come from, when they came from Eastern Europe, from democratic states. I mean, Poland was not a democratic, and Russia was not a democratic state in the 19th century. Even Germany was not a democratic state. It was only for a short time in the Weimar Republic, and even that collapsed and so on. The beginning of democracy in Germany, if at all, began after 1945. So all the Jews came from traditions which were not very democratic. We had to learn that by ourselves. But returning to your question, no, I don't think that the democratization of the Arab states is a question that Israel is in favor of. They are very much in favor when you have autocratic states, which they have to deal with, because then you can make business, you can deal.
Okay. I would have more questions touching directly on that, but now there's 2 hands risen and we are already above 1.5 hours. So probably we should get towards the end and listen to these 2 questions. Joachim, you would be first.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, Moshe. It's nice to see you tonight again and hear your point of view, which coincides a lot with my view also. I don't have an official position in any organization, but what I did, I went to Palestine a couple of years ago just to get an own opinion from my own side and only from my own view, seeing what's going on. And since then, this topic of peace, justice, and end of conflict in Palestine is something that is occupying me a lot. From what we have heard, and perhaps you can say if you to some extent agree to my view, what we heard so far is that this is a long-term
topic. It has been originated in the 19th century. The occupation now is lasting for more than 50 years. We see what is the electorate in Israel like. You describe them as mostly right-wing people. And what we also see is, and that is something that I find also interesting to note because that hasn't been mentioned, the Palestine cause is not an international issue. Yeah? Nobody cares about Palestine. In the European Parliament, there are some speeches and so on, but in the public view in Europe, and especially in Germany, the position of Israel is always predominant, and Germany is making a very big mistake from what I see in taking the crimes that have been committed towards the Jewish people, now withhold them to stand up for the rights that they have so much in mind when it comes about other people, but not when it comes to Palestinians. Then always Israeli interest is prevailing. What gave me a little bit of hope, I don't know if you have heard about it, is the speech of a deputy, a lady in the Irish Parliament that I heard the other day. She was the first politician that I heard in the last 20 years who really outrightly spoke about what's going on in Palestine. And there was obviously a resolution taken in the Irish Parliament against the politics of Israel in the occupied territories. Now, what I come to an end with this, what I think when we talk about the topics and the reasons, it's very interesting and very necessary to understand, and you rightly described the whole situation as it developed for more than a century. And we have to, that is my opinion, we have to face the fact that the solution will perhaps last another century to take, because people's mind as they are today cannot be changed quickly. And I don't see that out of Israel, a solution might pop up under the circumstances and the votings that have been noted in the last couple of years. Now, the only thing that I see that can contribute in the long term to a solution are the two following ones. The first is the Palestinians need to make much clearer to the international audience their point of view, and they must point out more on the injustice and violence they are suffering from. What I think about is, for instance, the Russians put Russia Today as a worldwide broadcasting medium in order to transport Russian views into the dominant Western press and television landscape. I think that is something that Palestine organization should focus on to make more public in the international view their circumstances they are living under. And the second is, as the big countries in the EU, and especially Germany, are more part of the problem than of a solution, I think a network needs to be knit between people like those Irish parliamentary representatives and other peoples, I call them peoples of goodwill, to slowly but surely come up with a moral point of view, with a moral standard, with a moral evaluation of the situation, as the West is always transporting his values that the West needs to defend. Look at Belarus at the moment. They're talking about values, but they do not talk about the values they violated themselves. But the value discussion is also, I think, is a lever for the Palestine cause in the long term to turn people's mind on an international basis. And perhaps a third point that is also discussable is that perhaps Palestinians could use that, completely changing their point of view and saying, no, we are not wanting our own state, in brackets, they won't get it anyway, as you pointed out rightly, but we want one state. And in this one state, then we demand the rights, the equal rights for every citizen of this state. And this is exactly what the Western values are asking for everywhere in the world. They're asking for participation and equal rights. And perhaps this could be a lever to change domestic Israeli policy in the long term. And I'm talking about 15 to 100 years. Thank you.
In 50 or 100 years, I wouldn't be around anymore. So I can only hope that sometimes the history will turn. And as I think that I'm Hegelian too, that is only a Pendelbewegung. Sometimes it's here and then it's there. The question is, you know, there is the big story about Franz Joseph, the Austrian emperor, when some people, as his writers, came and say there are some Republicans who want to turn Austria into a republic. He said, well, it's okay, but it won't be in meine Amtsperiode anymore. It won't be in my time anymore. So yes, if you want to talk with me about ideals, and about utopia, and about visions of what should happen, I'm with you. And as a matter of fact, I formulated them in some of my books some 30 years ago, what I would like to have. But what turned out that my book were so valuable as to show that I was a good idealist, but not a good, not a big realist in looking at what's happening. When you're talking about the question of propagate the Palestinian problem in terms of propaganda, or in terms of media practices, they tried everything. They really tried everything, starting, with back in the 60s. I don't know whether you remember, with making themselves heard by a terrorist act of, kidnapping airplanes and so on. And then they became more, in the time of Arafat, more diplomatic and so on. They tried everything. The problem is that nobody in the world cares about the Palestinian people, for the very small fact that you don't gain anything by supporting them. You gain by supporting them some moral values, but moral values is good for you and me sitting here and talking about moral values. Moral values never dominated politics, neither in all the Greek and Roman times, nor in modern times. When you speak about the European values, or the values that most of the people talk about, I'm a Marxist and I'm talking about ideology as false consciousness. We're talking about values, but we don't really want this value to become real, because we will have to pay a price for that. And in that respect, the problem that I'm talking about is that the fact that the Palestinians are not on the agenda of not only of Netanyahu, but of the world, has to do with the constellation of the world. And what happened lately is we had a man like Trump. What happened lately is that we have in Hungary a man like Viktor Orban, but we have people like Bolsonaro in Brazil and so on. By the way, all these people came to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. These fascists and racists came to Yad Vashem, where the guests of Netanyahu, who could put, a kranz in Yad Vashem, Yad Vashem being the Holocaust museum. This turn to fascist and autocratic policies has been the big disease of the world as a whole, because of Trump, but of Europe too. I mean, just try to see what you had here in the last 2030. You had Berlusconi, and you had Viktor Orban, and you have the Polish guys, and so on and so on. So in that respect, I'm not very optimistic that the European values, I mean, we come out from the Aufklärung, from the Enlightenment, that these values are still kept by very much by the big politics. I don't see it. I don't see it. I mean, I really can agree with you with everything that you said, but we have to understand that you and me, we're talking about ideals. We're talking about visions. Talking about visions where neither you nor me will experience them when they come to when they will manifest themselves. But I think that at present, of course, and I know that Wolfgang is completely frustrated with what I've done here this evening, because he invited me in order to give you some optimistic view of how we get into peace. But I think that every step towards peace needs to be accompanied by very, very analytical and realistic analysis of what's at stake here. We have to understand the powers that are working here in order to understand how we can break them. And at the moment, at least in Israel, they are not managing to break them. We're going to have another government, but this other government will not be one pint, not 1 millimeter better than what Netanyahu was, because these people are right-wing politicians. Just imagine that Lieberman is going to be one of the people. He was for ethnic cleansing. He was for the Bevölkerungstransfer. Just try to imagine just a man like Naftali Bennett is going to be the prime minister if they get the rotation government there. I mean, this man is one of the settlers. I mean, he's not living in the settlements, but he's one of the, this is Israelisch-Palästinensische. This is the people who vote for him. Try to think about a man like Gideon Sa'ar. Gideon Sa'ar is more right-wing than Netanyahu. He is a truly good ideologist from very old time. The woman who comes with Naftali Bennett is Ayelet Shaked. I don't know whether you heard her. She's a very pretty woman, but this is a right-wing fascist woman who really was very proud of the fact that she's fascist a year ago. We're talking about this constellation. I'm not talking about the big world now. Now, what will happen in 50 or 100 years? I want just to give you one hint. When Marx was talking about the realm of freedom, Reich der Freiheit, he was very moderate and very humble in trying to describe what it would be, because he said, I should tell the people in 200 years how to live. I can criticize and analyze capitalism as I see it in my time, and we have to get rid of capitalism. But I don't know how socialism would look like. I don't have to tell people in 200 years how to live. And in that respect, yes, I hope that you are right and that we will get rid of the two-state solution in order to become one-state solution. You know what? I want to work without states anymore, if that would be even better. But it's not going to happen next week, so we have to be realistic about that. Pablo, I'm quite finished. And last question now, okay?
Well, there's no other ones. I have more, but I can see if you're tired. Maybe you already.
No, I'm not tired. I have some work to do. So this is why I have to finish now. But I'm not going anywhere. I'll be staying with you. Not now, but I'll be again. Maybe next time we can do it for a smaller group in German for those who have trouble within English. As a matter of fact, my English itself is not, just gelbe vom Ei.
Okay, sweet. Then this is it for today. Thank you very much, Moshe. As it was announced already, we are keeping on with the Internationale FriedensFabrik Wanfried, with the Peace Factory. There's a meeting of the initiative for the new North-South Commission, which is the work group that Salah, Wolfgang, and me are working here in 2 weeks. Today, in 2 weeks, again, 7 o'clock. If there'd be so far there's no talk planned. It might be, if people are interested also to connect on the Palestinian issues, please come up to us. The email address was written in the chat, and you always find us on Internationale FriedensFabrik Wanfried.org. And you can write us there and get in contact with us if you have any suggestions for further events or meetings. And it would be nice if people come up and want to network to a work group on the Palestinian solidarity and work towards peace there also. And except from that, happy to see you again there and wish all of you a good evening. If anybody else wants to say something, if not, Moshe, Wolfgang, you do have the last word.
Yeah, if I got Moshe right, we don't have much hope for a change in Israel, how I see it now, in a positive direction. But I think if I got you right, we in Europe and Germany, we are in a very important position to come here to press more for a political solution. And the colleague spoke about Ireland, and I think we need a networking in Europe and in Germany. Here, naturally, you need courage. Because if you just want peace and say something for the Palestinians, they try to put you as an anti-Semite, but we have to have the courage. This, I think, even for the Jews and the Palestinian, peace will only be if there's justice. So let's form, in the Peace Factory, we want to organize a network. And Moshe also said, I think if I got you right, you will be part, and we try to get Palestinians, so that we really, it will be a lasting...
No, you get Palestinians. It's not my job to get for you
Palestinians.
No,
we get for you, but you are within the dialogue with them.
Yeah.
No, we try to find people, but so I beg you, it's a long struggle, but important struggle, and we have to see, we are trying to renovate the idea of Willy Brandt of the North-South Coalition. He said, mankind is in danger today that we destroy us. We are the first time. The risk of an atomic war, the risk of climate destruction, and we have to see, we need a conflict solution also to come forward to survive for our kids. So we have to see, I think, the broad thing, even for Israelis and Palestinians, for us all. We are jumping in the direction of a catastrophe. And this level of understanding is very needed everywhere, that we are depending on each other and also to find peaceful solutions in this way.
Good. This is a good last words. Let's say goodbye to all of you. We'll see each other again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Shalom Aleichem. So, zack, verlassen, bye-bye, bye-bye.
So, Pablo ist weg, ne? If you still hear us, please, wenn ihr uns noch hört, ja, schreibt uns einfach eine E-Mail, wenn wir euch einladen sollen, auf dem Laufenden halten sollen. Und ja, müssen wir.
Ich glaube, die meisten sind schon raus. Wolfgang, ich denke, ja, genau. Du musst die Aufnahme dieser stoppen.
Was? Aufnahme stoppen, ja. Ist gut, dass du es mir gesagt hast. Ich hatte es vergessen, der Anfang ist nicht drauf.
Ja.
Hast gesehen, ne? Klasse, danke. Also sein Vortrag ist weitgehend drauf, das ist gut.
Ja, genau.
Ja.